Good too. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to this interview. For my sake and for the sake of the people viewing, would you mind quickly introducing yourself, who you are, where you're from, what do you do?
Absolutely. Well, before I begin, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the audience who will be listening or reading. So to briefly introduce myself, I was born and raised in Izmir, Turkey, until my the age of 15, and then I went to Istanbul Koç School as a boarding high school student. And then upon graduating from Koç High School, I went to Koç University Law School. And after graduating from there in 2022, I came to the US, to Boston, Suffolk University Law School, JD program. I got a scholarship as well from Suffolk University, almost like 50%. I'd say like 25,000 per year. And yeah, so far, I mean, I did a couple internships during my summers, both in Turkey and the US. But yeah, this will be a brief, introduction for me.
So I just want to, for the sake of my knowledge as well, I mean, you've studied law in two different countries. What brought you to study law in the first place in Turkey? I mean, why make that choice for, your major in university? And what made you make that choice then coming to the US to study law as well?
Uh, so the basically, I can say the desire for justice and like my social skills also pushed me towards this area, to be frank, and just my interests basically. But I think I can say the house I grew up, the household that encouraged me to debate, critical thinking, standing up for my right, and my parents basically instilled me to the important questioning authority and engaging thoughtfully, with like I don't know, like complex social issues, and these values align well with the study of law. And yeah, it's like growing up in Turkey, a country that undergoes frequent legal and political transformation, also made me aware of the role that law plays in shaping social order and democratic norms. And yeah, here we are.
Fair enough. So on that cultural bit, I find something you said very interesting, which you used the word justice. And what does that word mean to you? What is sort of your cultural definition of justice?
Um, well, that's a great question. Let me take a moment to think about that. For me, I guess justice is treating everyone equally and having some sort of, reliability on the law and like on the codes or like precedent cases and whatnot. Just like the idea of reliability, um, protection, due process, yeah, all that like, like a holistic, in a holistic way, all those in bits and pieces.
And do you feel as though that your sort of definition of justice tracks across in your Turkish and then American legal education, or do you think there's some differences that you'd want to highlight?
No, no, I mean, so in my view, there's always going to be injustice. Theoretically, we can say there would be no injustice, but it's not going to be true. We just have to do as well as possible as a society and as attorneys and prosecutors and political politicians. So we have to like we have to do as best as we can, but there's always going to be injustice. Like I really like the story where like briefly there's a beach full of starfishes, and like someone goes to the beach and like starts throwing them back in the sea, and then another person sees them and they're like, what are you doing? Like it's all the beach is full of starfishes, you're not going to be able to save them all. And then the other person picks one up and like throws it to the sea, back at the sea, and then they're like, see, like I changed something for this starfish.
Mhm.
And I always try to like think like that in my affairs, my studies, and my life, basically.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that's a good individual focus on justice. So staying sort of on the educational system side, do you what are the sort of differences that stood out to you in the Turkish versus American legal educational institutions?
Well, as you know, in Turkey, people you can go to law school just right after high school. So
Mhm.
the people in law school, they go as early as like 18, sometimes even 17. So it's a really young age. So that's a big difference. People here, they're like probably at least 22 and even more. Like people, 30, 40, 50 years old. People come to law school here. They have kids. They're married. They have they're working part-time. They're like doing night school, or they're doing full-time school, but they have to support their tuition by working, like I don't know, like McDonald's or something like that, or like as a clerk in law office. But I didn't really see that in Turkey, honestly. Maybe I because I went to Koç University as well. I mean, there were people, obviously very successful people who had scholarships, and I'm sure like that. I don't want to say like in Turkey people don't work like outside of school. That would be wrong. But here it's a much more like a different group of people all together in one pot.
Yeah.
So that's different. A and B, the also in Turkey law school is 4 years. In here it's 3 years. Here also, your kind of like your grades are kind of determined with your 1L like first year grades. That's like the most important bit of law school, because after that, using those grades, you get into an internship. Possibly they, do make a return offer. Sometimes for second year. I mean, other times you get to return offer from second year to third year. So the internship culture here is very different. Like if you're not doing an internship, that's like almost you're missing out something. But in Turkey, I know people who didn't do internships in their first and second year summers, for example. And I think, as I said, I think it comes back to the point that you're very young there. You don't really know what you want to do.
Mhm.
As opposed to here, people come to law school. Most of the people come to law school with like goals, like say they're like a, I don't know, like a biomedical engineer, but they want to become a patent lawyer. They come study law and like do it together, if you know what I mean. And also another aspect that's different is the Socratic method. Here in the US, it's more like you're speaking, not it's not like, oh yeah, let me go and listen to the professor, tell me what's going on. But you read the cases, the statutes, or whatever it might be beforehand, and then you come prepared. And then it's the Socratic method, I'm sure. It's questions back and forth, like, yeah, like tell me what Justice Kagan said here, like what did he mean, like all those things are kind of like some, I think, major points that are different in both education systems.
Fair enough. So circling back on that demographics point you made of, Turkish law students are significantly younger, at least by 4 years. What
Yeah.
sort of difference do you think that makes in the classroom space, in the way students interact with professors and the way they interact with each other? Do you think that changes the educational environment?
Absolutely. So, coming back to one of my points, I think people who come to law school in the US are very, they have like specific goals. They come here for a purpose, as opposed to in Turkey. And I don't want to say people who go to law school in Turkey doesn't have a purpose, but you're younger, and like these days, I think college, even though theoretically it's not a must, it's kind of like a must. Like everyone goes to college, but coming to JD is like another step. Like you're gonna devote another 3 or 4 years of your life. And as I said, most American people work to finance this, and they even get loan like federal loans or like whatever it might be, and then they pay that for years. That's a big sacrifice, so to speak. So they come here with like specific goals, very ambitious. But again, I don't want to like say that like Turkish law students are not ambitious, but just maturity, you know. Maybe I think that would be the right word to use.
Fair enough. And then to circle back on the second thing you said about the lecture styles versus the Socratic style, how was that adaptation for you going from, listening to lectures and then reading, codes, writing on exams versus then Socratic classes and then discussion-based sort of uh, not examinations, but assessments of your work. Did you feel that that was an easy transition?
So yeah, to be honest, I had a great education in Koç University, and most of my professors, if not all, had some kind of abroad experience, either LL.M, PhD, or SJD. Um, and like a significant amount of those LLMs were from prestigious US universities.
Mhm.
So I think in certain classes at least I got used to this Socratic method, although it wasn't really common. Some professors who had some exposure to the US law came back and did that. I mean, as effective as they could. And I remember like it was I think my my constitutional law class, my professor was doing that method, and I was like surprised, like, am I gonna like read the case before I'm coming to the class, like, or are you gonna like teach me? But she used to like cold call, and it was really scary, even, in my native language in Turkey. But like, you come to class, you're young, and but yeah, just to wrap up my point, I was kind of used to it because I had a great education in Koç University. And in fact, for example, the professor who wrote a recommendation to me, Kerem Gülay, my public international law professor, he had his SJD from Cornell. Like the guy stayed in the US for 6 years or more, so he really applied the whatever he learned here and whatever he found effective at least on us. So I came here somewhat prepared, but absolutely, it was absolutely really challenging, even though I, had some exposure, as I said, in Turkey. Yeah, like a couple things. English is obviously not my native language. I had English education for a long, long time. Starting from kindergarten, I went to like American schools in Turkey. I think I have good English, but obviously it's not my native language. So when people are thinking about, okay, am I going to be able to like, am I going to be able to give the right answer? I'm thinking, am I going to be able to form a correct sentence? And then am I going to be able to give the right answer? So it was like double, if not triple stressful for me, but then I got used to it. And I think you got to embrace the fact that you're not a native speaker. You're a foreigner who learned English as well as, as much as to a point where you can come to law school, have a JD degree. So that's impressive, and most of my friends were like impressed by that. Although I was like shy at times, and they're like, no, like that you have to imagine that like an American person learning Turkish, coming to Turkey, going to law school. So like you gotta like believe in yourself and have self-confidence. And as I said, embrace it's your second language. You're gonna make mistakes. It's okay. Just as long as like you study the material and communicate to try to communicate as well as you can. All is gonna be good. That's what I learned as time goes by.
Fair enough. And getting the mechanics down is, of course, it's important. And I want to take one step beyond that and ask, in the two different systems, of course, two different languages are spoken. But do you think the dynamics of communication were also different? The way you would talk to a professor in Turkey, for example, in Turkish and English, was it different from the way you would talk to a professor in the US?
Um, yeah, like I had great professors in at Koç, but I think in Turkey there's some kind of like barrier. Like I'm here, you're here. It's not even like um not even like as a human being, like I'm superior to you, but as position, like I'm professor. and your student. So that kind of thing, that kind of barrier you feel more in Turkey, I think. But here in the US, sometimes, let me give you like another example. Not a professor, but like I go to networking events, encounter with like partners of law firms, and then the guy's like, well, just like call me Steve. Like, don't you don't have to say like Mr. blah blah blah. Like just, and I'm like, call you Steve? Like you're, I don't know, 25 years older than me, and you're a law partner. Like I'm look, so like I was surprised, with professors too. I mean, they don't say, yeah, like call me, Mark, but like office hours and everything. And we had office hours in at Koç too, but I don't know, in the US it feels a little bit closer. You can like easily, the professors seemed a little easy to access.
And going beyond the educational space, you mentioned calling a law partner by their first name. Do you think that this general sort of, I guess, proximity of position reflects in the perception of lawyers at large?
Um, so in the US,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say even like even I met with like a couple judges, which is like a really, prestigious thing to be in the US. And even then they're like, I don't know, like really down to earth, humble, like not like, oh, like I'm a judge or whatever, like whatever it might be. So I think, yeah, it reflects most of the most of the legal community in my experience.
And
And again, like I don't want folks to get me wrong, like in Turkey there are people like that, but it's just like, especially in the academy world, I think, just to like reiterate what I said, the titles are like a little bit more important, like I'm a professor, I, did my doctorate, postdoc, whatever, like assistant professorship. And then also in the US, you can become a professor, like an adjunct professor, while having, I don't know, working at a law firm. You come, maybe it's also because like you come to the university, you become a professor. We call you professor, but the professor term in Turkey is like another whole path, like maybe like a 20-year of, it's actually like another kind of title, maybe. Maybe that there's like a misconception in people's minds. And I'm not saying all people, like all the professors in the US are like, yeah, let me just become any like adjunct professor. Some has SJDs, PhDs, and all that, but not all are like that.
no. So, sort of looking at your own experience with these different, I guess, views on hierarchy, it might be. What do you think are the sort of cultural factors that lead into it? Why do you feel that it feels a little more stratified in Turkey versus more close and, I guess, fond of one another, regardless of statute in the US?
Well, that's a really like deep, sociological question. I, I I don't really have a really like developed answer to that, but maybe as far in my like 3 years in the US, as a society, they're like a little, chiller. Like,
Mhm.
I always like dress up, like, um, go to law school with a blazer and all that, but like they can come with like much, comfortable clothes and like, like a hat in the classroom or something. Although like some professors don't like that.
Mhm.
And maybe you can see this more in undergrad, but I think that still, continues into law school. It's not like, don't expect like people to be like in suits and like dresses or whatever. I think like as a culture, they're like, chill.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But I don't have, other than that, I don't have another like deeper, analysis. I don't know. Like I've only been here for the last 3 years, so.
I mean, fair enough. Um, I think what I would be curious about is if how that feels for you, the sort of wanting to dress up, wanting to refer to a professor last name versus Steve or Joe. Does that feel weird, or do you think it's come more natural to you to refer to people by their first names, for example?
Um, so for the dressing up part, that's also my personal interest, kind of. Like I do that regardless. And In Turkey, people also come like with, I don't know, chiller, like more casual clothing. But yeah, like I like dressing up as a personal interest.
Mhm.
But I think like being, clean shade, like wearing a tie, wearing a blazer, I think it creates a good impression. That's what my view is. And as for the like professor or like Steve part, I found it very like even when they tell you like you can call me Steve, they consent to it basically. I still felt weird, like I shouldn't be doing this. And also in Turkey, like in Turkish language, we have like you, like senses, but like in English, you don't have that distinction. But that's also like feels a little different to me. But yeah, I'll say like you should never assume to call anyone by their name. But if they like consent to it, obviously, um, yeah, there's like a there's a slight balance that even if they say like call me Steve, if you keep referring them Mr. something, that might also show that okay, like you don't want to like get maybe closer or like personal a little bit. So it has to be like you have to watch out for that balance depending on who you're talking to. So it might backfire too, like if you insist on being super formal.
Mhm. Yeah. So I want to sort of shift our perspective in one quick way, which is, we've spoken about different cultures and these transitions sort of as oh, have there been difficulties? Oh, how have you sort of adapted? But I want to ask, were there any situations where this different cultural background of coming from Turkey instead of just being an American law student was an asset to you in sort of in a classroom, in a networking event, in any, interpersonal or career challenges that you had?
Absolutely. So first of all, coming here, although well, okay, first of all, you know another like law system that's so valuable. Although
Mhm.
it's a civil law doctrine, like here is common law, there's civil law. You still have like the notion of law.
Mhm.
For the last 4 years, whether it's super similar or not, you had some kind of like law experience. You've taken like I don't know, like dozens of exams. So you have some kind of like, uh, there are some basic parts that's going to be kind of similar in both systems, like, I don't know, due process or, mens rea, actus reus. That's like, that doesn't really change. So coming with that knowledge, obviously gave me a huge advantage, I think, understanding the concepts and everything. So, because imagine like say I studied finance in Turkey. I came here, I don't know meaning of a word. I look it up. And then I see a word that I don't even know in Turkish because I didn't study law. So that was a huge advantage for me. Like looking a word up, like I already knew what it meant. Um, Generally speaking, that was an advantage. There were times that like the translation was bad or something, or in Turkish it's like something a little different than that. But generally speaking, that was a huge advantage. And um, people knowing you like studied law as an undergrad, I think is also um, a factor uh, that they start to respect you more. That this person is dedicated, like still doing law school for the last 7 years, like at a point when I'm like 3L, they're like, okay, you're studying law 7 years. That's like something impressive. And it's definitely a conversation starter. Like they're like, oh, you have a little bit of an accent. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah. And where are you from? I'm from Turkey. Like, yeah, I studied law there. Wow, you studied law? Like can you do that as an undergrad? Yeah, like it's definitely a conversation starter. Um, yeah, so and different you have different kind of perspective to cultures and all that. In European culture, yeah, I think yeah, bottom line, I think it helped me a lot.
Fair enough. Well, sort of as we look at your 4 years in Turkey and 3 years in the US, you've certainly had a very long and I guess kind of bifurcated legal education. But I sort of want to ask, were there any areas that you felt, needed some improvement when you came to the US? Did you feel accepted or understood or heard? Or do you think that there were some aspects of cross-border, cross-cultural education that you think would require some change?
Um, let me see. Can you rephrase the question again one more time if you can?
Yeah, of course.
I'm
So,
just gathering my thoughts. Sorry.
of course, it's a linguistic transition to go from Turkey to the U.S. It's a cultural transition. It's a
Mm.
systems civil to common law transition. So it's a
Yeah.
transition in a lot of different ways. And my sort of question is obviously emails to a young lawyer, right? So advice, understanding what young Turkish legal professionals should be looking at. What did you feel were sort of the strengths of the system when we sort of spoke about that, which were, discussion-based classes, which were understanding and more, fond relationships with your professors. But I'm wondering if there were any sort of challenges in that, anything that you ran into that you felt was systemic, anything that you would feel needed change, and then the addendum to that would be anything that, you would recommend to another Turkish law graduate coming to the US, coming to study and get a JD in how they should adapt. But that's sort of a secondary question. So I wanted to start with the institutional part first and what you felt were sort of the mismatches in that.
Um, I don't know if this is gonna be like an exact answer to your question, but for example, coming here, I understood that how important networking is. I mean, I knew that it back in Turkey too, but here, we have a lot of networking events, either like in school, or like in bar associations, Boston Bar Association, Massachusetts Bar Association. So I realized how important it is to attend to those and like foster connections. I also, upon realizing the importance of that, I got business cards for myself, like my name, my email number, just like really basic. Maybe like I had a small LinkedIn QR. I think that was really a game changer because when I asked someone for their card, and they're like, "Oh, I don't even have a card now," and I'm like, "Okay, let me give you my business card. Then you have my LinkedIn there and all that." They're like impressed. Wow, you're like prepared. And as I said, like combine that with as I said, like I dress up and all that. I like that. So combined with that, I think um, like from Suits, I like this quote where it says like first impression is the last. I kind of believe in that. So like you go like full strength. So I think networking events are really important. And also like at school, you don't know who you're gonna see. Like you can run into a alumni judge on the elevator. So you always got to. That's why I'm like, okay, like I'm always shaved. Like suit up. So, like I'm always ready. If you tell me, okay, like we're gonna meet with the president of Boston Bar Association after class, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, let's do that. So I think being prepared for this kind of interaction, because as lawyers, a significant aspect of what we do is like client communication, talking to people. So you gotta like mm, give a make a good impact.
And
So,
then
but so networking events. I think that basically bottom line. I think you got the gist.
okay. Well, fair enough. And then as we sort of wrap up, I have one last question, but with respect to your time as well. With the networking events, with carrying themselves forward in JD or LLM programs, would you have any other pieces of advice for Turkish law students? Any strategies that helped you out? Any challenges that you ran into that you think, wow, if they vicariously learned through my experience, they could avoid the problems I ran into?
So specifically for networking events, or generally speaking, including that.
If you want to go specific for networking, that would be great. If you have something more general, that would also be amazing.
So I think generally speaking, if I could go back, I would attend more of the office hours, especially for my 1L. Because as I said, I had this misconception where like professor and I like we're distant. I can't. It's they're not like really that approachable. And again, I think like Koç is an exception in Turkey. I had great professors, but still, it even is better here in terms of boundaries and all that. We already talked about that. So if I knew how accessible they were, I would have attended many more office hours. Um, that and secondarily, I think I already pointed this out, but especially for JD, um, 1L year is like extremely important. If you're like unsure about law school or like need some um, language training or something like that, just like come to 1L, prepared, like with your mindset, prepared for like long hours of study and all that. You can't just like I personally coming straight out of law school in Turkey, like I think I graduated by the end of June, and then I came here in August. By the end of August, I was already in school, and there are kind of like obstacles of finding a place, getting a visa these days. All those are like also stress factors in between by the end of June and August, those 2 months. That's already stressful. So obviously, like we don't have most of the people don't have the flexibility of like, yeah, let me like take a year off and like prepare my mind for it, but just do it as much as possible. As for um, LLM versus JD, I think if one wants to stay here and become an attorney in the US, find employment by US employers too, whatever it might be, not just like specifically hired by a Turkish person, but if you want to broaden your um, job opportunities, the way to go is to do JD, but obviously it's a much heavier education, both like more challenging, obviously, but also financially. And you like as a commitment, it's 3 years versus LLM is 1 year. LLM, it's like mostly international students, like unless you go to like taxation or something like that, it's mostly going to be international students. But in JD, you're dealing with 95% of the time with like American people, whether they're like second generation or third, whatever it might be. So, but if you have the like financial means, the education, language skills, and the patience and the hard work in you, and if you want to be able to stay here, JD is the way to go, I think, for those people who are in law school right now, especially in Turkey. And just one final advice, I think, for networking is I rather learn this like later. I think is that like maybe it's gonna be a little cliche, but the elevator pitch is kind of important. Like like handshake. I'm doing this and this. I did this, and I want to do this in the future. Like present, past, and future. Like that 30 seconds to 1 minute small elevator pitch, as we said, is really important as as an introduction, because you don't get to like maybe talk to someone for a long time, so they gotta remember what you do, what you did, and what you want to do in the future, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And one final thing as we wrap up, if we look back on this conversation and you had to choose one story, one insight, one thing that you wanted an archaeologist 2,000 years from now to know, which one thing would you want to highlight for future young lawyers?
One of the things that we talked about, or one of the moments I had in law school. Can you?
So I wanted to get sort of what you wanted to highlight. It could be a story, it could be an insight that you shared, anything that you would want to highlight.
Uh, so yeah, I think I kind of said it like in terms of getting an employment in the US, if that's like your goal. I already made the distinctions between JD and LLM, but to add one thing, by the way, to that, if you only want an experience here, like a broad experience, a different cultural exposure, and then you're like certainly gonna go back, go for an LLM. Obviously, of course, don't do JD and like go back, that would be nonsense. Um, but I'm also looking at your the questionnaire, like to the questions you shared uh, to take away from my story. Well, just give me a couple seconds, okay? Here. Just maybe let me finish with a couple words that I think are valuable. Is that like don't let the differences hold you back, and being bilingual, multicultural and trained in legal systems, it's never a liability. As I explained before, it's your advantage, and like you have to use it. And as I said, it's a huge accomplishment coming from Turkey, being able to like study here, whether at LLM or JD in another country, in another language. So be proud of where you come from, but also keep building who you are. And those will be my final thoughts.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for coming to this interview. I really appreciate your time and your insights. If you don't have anything else, I'm gonna end the recording.
Sure, maybe a word after the recording. Appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.